All right, we're going to try and
After their presentations, they can have 5 minutes of discussion among each other before we open it up. So they would ask each other questions.
Sure. We're going to try and keep things on time with Ken's admonition. Good morning. Welcome to the first full session of this conference. Should we adopt the Social Security recommendations of the Fiscal Commission Co-Chairs? My name is Norman Ornstein. I'm glad everybody could make it here. It was so cold this morning they needed ice scrapers to get the tears off of John Boehner's face. We are fresh off the State of the Union message where we had the unprecedented seating across party lines. You could just feel the sexual tension in the room. And, of course, before that, the historic visit of President Hu to Washington and the White House. Fox News called it a gathering of the world's most powerful communist and the President of China. So, got to use these. They have a short half-life. Let me introduce our very distinguished panelists. Chuck Blahous is a public trustee of Social Security and Medicare, one of the two public trustees. He's also a research fellow at the Hoover Institution, well known to anybody who's followed Social Security over the years for his time on Capitol Hill. And I remember a wonderful profile by Jackie Calmes in the Wall Street Journal of Chuck as the Social Security guru in the Bush White House. But with a fascinating background in science. And so if you say this is not rocket science, actually Chuck can show you how it's at least chemical. Andy Stern is at the Georgetown Public Policy Institute and, of course, was a member of the commission, but is best known for his role as what I think almost any objective observer would say is the most seminal leader of the labor movement over many years as president of the Service Employees International Union, and a long career in the labor movement and, of course, as a public intellectual. Janice Gregory is president of the National Academy of Social Insurance, also has a long career in dealing with employee benefits and sometime engaged in the policy process through the Ways and Means Committee in the House of Representatives. So what we're going to do here is we're going to have each of our distinguished panelists give some brief remarks. We'll have a little talking amongst ourselves. I'll try not to get too verklempt as we do that, and then we'll open it up, and we'll keep on time. So let me start with Chuck.
Well, thank you so much for the very kind introduction. I should issue a disclaimer before I begin, although I am a Social Security and Medicare trustee. Those of us who serve as trustees also have day jobs, and as trustees, we don't have opinions about anything, only about program finances. So nothing that I say here today should certainly reflect upon the policy opinions of either, certainly not of the other trustees, or any of the ongoing work that I do as a trustee. I've been asked to speak today about the proposals of the co-chairs of the President's Fiscal Commission. And if you'd asked me 1 year ago if I was to be in a panel 1 year later opposite Andy Stern talking about the recommendations of the President's Fiscal Commission, I would have expected that I would have been arguing against them and he would have been arguing for them. So this is a little bit different from what I had expected. But it's a very pleasant duty to be here. I was particularly pleased to be put on a panel with both Janice and Andy. Janice I've known for several years, and Andy I've had the pleasure of getting to know in just the last couple of months. And it certainly is a great honor and privilege for me to be on this panel. It's also very pleasant because there's nothing better as a public speaker than praising somebody else's work. I've worked on a lot of bipartisan commissions, and I spent a lot of time canvassing commission members, trying to get their opinions, putting together compromise proposals, and then dealing with the incoming as people come out and critique your work. And that often puts you in a difficult and defensive mode. But today I have a great luxury. I get to talk about a product that I had absolutely nothing to do with and to praise what I think was some very good work done by other people, and work that I fervently believe does warrant our praise and respect. Let me just make a couple of very quick I hope quick, comments about the Commission's product. The first is that the Simpson-Bowles framework for Social Security reform is a reasonable compromise between different ways of fixing Social Security. Notice I say reasonable. I've underlined it. I'm not here to say that it's necessarily optimal or perfect. It's not even my personal preferred policy. In my ideal policy world, we'd fix Social Security without a tax increase. I personally believe that the case for fixing Social Security with added revenues would be much stronger if we had a different kind of Social Security program, if we had a savings program. Then I think you could make a stronger case that we should be putting more revenues into it in order to maintain replacement rates going forward. But we don't have that kind of program. We have basically an income transfer program. So anything we promise in terms of Social Security benefits doesn't add to net national retirement saving. It simply comes from the income of subsequent generations and actually reduces the pool of income that they have available to do other retirement savings. So for various reasons that I won't get into in detail, this isn't personally where I am, but my point is that it's a reasonable compromise. If you look at the current system's financial projections, that green line on the bottom represents projected revenues, that purple line on the top represents projected benefit obligations, and they went somewhere pretty well in the middle. In the near term, when we have the biggest increase in costs, they probably do a little bit more of it on the revenue side. The long term, probably a little bit more on the cost containment side. Where it's 50-50 and where it's exactly in the middle, I don't know. But the point is that it's somewhere in the ballpark of where any ultimate bipartisan compromise is going to be. Second point I'd make is that this is a highly progressive proposal. Now, I've put a chart together here that I know that no one is going to be able to read. It's a very badly designed chart on my part. So let me just explain to you what it shows. Basically, what I'm trying to show here is how benefits for people at different income levels would grow over time under Simpson-Bowles relative to current law. And what I've tried to show is that is how benefits would look in 2050 relative to where they are in 2010. Now, in 2010, if you look on the left side of this graph, you can basically see that there is a rough, not exact proportionality, but a rough proportionality of benefits for people on the high end versus people on the low end. The more you put in, the more you get back. It's not an exact proportionality. You get a better return if you're on the low income end than on the high end. But basically, you could see how people at different income levels fare in terms of the benefits they expect from Social Security. And what we have going forward really depends on whether we fix this system by raising taxes or living within projected revenues. If we live within projected revenues, you get what we call present law payable, where we pay a little bit more than we're paying today on a per capita basis in 2050, and substantially more than we're paying today on a per capita basis if you raise taxes to finance the system. And what Simpson-Bowles does, you can see how that third data point there is really, it's somewhat different from the other ones. You can see how Simpson-Bowles substantially increases the benefits that we would be paying to people on the low-income end and achieve solvency mostly by constraining the growth of benefits on the high-income end. And that's a very important point to understand about Simpson-Bowles from a distributional perspective. Now, the third point I'd make about Simpson-Bowles, and I think this is very important, this is really the essence of why I believe this is a proposal that is worth supporting. I think that they paid both left and right the compliment of listening very carefully to what they stated were their top priorities. And they did not react to each side's caricature of people across the aisle. If you talk to people on the left, they'll say, well, we really care about the system as a social insurance program. We care about income security protections for the most vulnerable in our society. We're concerned about making sure that we have this adequacy of protections for people who need it. And so Simpson-Bowles said, okay, we'll honor that. We'll fortify those protections. You talk to people on the right, they say, we're really concerned about the growth of costs. We have an enormous increase in costs relative to the tax base coming from Social Security over the next quarter century. That concerns us. That's a much greater tax burden than we want to levy on our kids and those who follow them. So we need to do something to contain that growth of costs. And Simpson-Bowles said, okay, we'll do some of that. Now, notice what they didn't do. What they didn't do was to sort of pander to the stereotypes of each side of the aisle. They didn't say, well, we're just going to have full scheduled benefit growth for everybody, regardless of its impact on costs and on future taxpayers. And we're also not going to contain cost growth at the expense of people who need Social Security the most. And I think this is really important because I strongly am of the view that any solution that's put together that ignores these priorities of people on the left or the right simply isn't going to pass the Congress. If we do something that simply ignores the right's concerns over cost growth, we're not going to get anywhere. If you put something together that ignores the left's concerns about income protections for economically vulnerable people, we're not going to get anywhere. Both sides are given what they state to be their highest priorities, and both sides have to make some concessions to the viewpoints of the other side. Fourth point I'd make about Simpson-Bowles is that I think the individual provisions of Simpson-Bowles are very well considered. That doesn't mean they're perfect. That doesn't mean I support every single provision. But they didn't just go after this program with a meat axe. They didn't just put together a Chinese menu of reform options and said, let's add them up and declare solvency. Instead, if you look at it provision by provision, it's very clear that they thought carefully about what would be the impact of each provision and also what would be the pushback against each provision. So whether you're talking about the progressive changes they make to the benefit formula, I think they did that in a very surgical way, both in terms of the income spectrum effects and in terms of the timing of the savings. They were very careful in how they did their retirement age changes. It's an extremely, extremely gradual change. One anecdote I told about it was that my 4-year-old daughter, under this proposal, would actually be able to claim benefits at an earlier age than the generation that fought the Spanish-American War. That's how gradual the retirement age changes were. And they put in a lot of provisions that I don't happen to think are necessarily optimal or the best policy, but certainly a number of provisions to deal with any concerns about any adverse consequences of raising the retirement age. They increased the cap on taxable wages. I don't happen to like that provision, but they did it in a way that was very careful. They didn't repeat what I would regard as one mistake of the 1983 reforms, which is to put a lot of additional tax revenue on the federal ledger up front, which the government could then use to spend on things outside of Social Security and create kind of an illusory solvency rather than actually using this revenue to improve our ability to finance Social Security benefit payments. They phase in this cap and taxable wage increase over time so that the revenue rolls in as it's needed to pay benefits. So across the board, you can see very careful thought, provision by provision, in how they went about putting together the solvency solution. Now, I'm not here to claim that this is a perfect proposal. If I were on a congressional staff and someone were asking me what I would do with it, there's a number of changes I would make. There's certainly provisions in there that I don't like. I'm not crazy about the provision to bring in state and local workers. I regard that as largely superfluous to the larger fiscal sustainability questions. You get additional revenue from these people up front. You just have to pay them more in benefits later on. The program that they put together is fiscally sustainable with or without that provision, and I fear unintended consequences for the various struggling state and local plans around the country. Earlier, I'd made reference to the fact that I don't think some of the new early benefit claim options are free of complexity, free of potential misapplication. And there's also a lot of problems they just decided they wouldn't solve. We have a program that offers very poor returns to seniors who are contemplating whether to extend their working lives. There's a lot of things we could do to improve the program's treatment of people if they continue to work. They didn't deal with a lot of these issues, so I don't think it's a perfect proposal, nor do I think it's one that shouldn't be tweaked. But what I am here to say is that I think the proposal, if it's not enacted as it is, and if we don't simply tweak it, if we try to do something that's fundamentally different from Simpson-Bowles, I don't think we're going to get anywhere. There's really only 3 main alternatives to Simpson-Bowles. One is to try to do something that's qualitatively, fundamentally to the left of Simpson-Bowles. One is to try to do something that's qualitatively, fundamentally to the right of Simpson-Bowles. And the third thing is simply not to do anything at all. And I think these are both, all 3 of these are very unattractive options. First of all, let's look at what would happen if we tried to move Simpson-Bowles significantly to the left. Well, in fact, that basically means putting more revenue into the program over time in order to fund a higher aggregate level of benefit payments. And basically that means we're simply not going to deal with the concerns of people in the right and certainly many in the center as well about the growth of costs in Social Security. I would maintain this really introduces kind of a difficult set of choices from a policy perspective. What are we going to do with that additional revenue? Are we going to justify having higher tax burdens than Simpson-Bowles on future generations to pay benefits that are predominantly targeted on people on the upper end of the income spectrum? That would be inefficient. I'm not sure that's equitable. Or are we going to further increase the protections in Simpson-Bowles on the lower income end? Well, this is already a very highly progressive proposal. As it is, you already have kind of a severance of the link between contributions and benefits for a fair number of people on the low income end. If we upped the benefit protections still further on the low income end, you'd basically be completely severing the contribution benefit link for literally millions of workers going forward. We have a similar problem if we try to move the package to the right. Now, on policy grounds, I would love to see a package that is somewhat to the right of Simpson-Bowles. But in order to do it, you would have to constrain the benefit growth more sharply than Simpson-Bowles does, and you have sort of the mirror image of these other difficult choices. Are we going to actually produce something that has less in the way of benefit protections for low-income people than Simpson-Bowles? That might be regarded as very unattractive. Or are we going to constrain benefit growth for high earners still more, and then, again, introduce this problem of really severing the contribution benefit connection for even larger numbers of people? Obviously, if you try to move the package fundamentally to the right, then you run the risk of reopening this whole very contentious personal account debate that we had a few years ago, and that might not be the best tactical move either. Now, of course, the third solution is simply not to do anything at all. And I hope that this audience is familiar enough with Social Security finances to know why that is an extremely bad idea, why it's the single most irresponsible outcome that we could have. So I won't go into it at length, but let me just say, for purposes of simplification, that basically the longer we delay, the worse any outcome that we produce is going to be. Basically, it means that we are leaving on the books for a longer period of time the substantial imbalance between the benefits that the system is promising and the revenues that it projects to collect. And every year that we delay, we have more and more baby boomers who are not going to be participants in the solution because they are already in retirement and basically their benefits are politically inviolate and they're no longer contributors to system revenues. So ultimately you wind up with a situation where you have to load up the consequences of attaining solvency even more so on the younger generations that are going to have the toughest time under this program as it is. Ultimately, you're going to wind up with a package that either has substantially higher tax burdens or fewer income security protections than Simpson-Bowles, probably a good measure of both. So whether you look at this program from the right or from the left, I would hope we would agree that a significant delay in fixing Social Security finances is a much less attractive option than something with the general contours of Simpson-Bowles. So just to summarize, and it looks like I'm going to make it within my time allotment, which I feared I would not, this is a plan that would stabilize Social Security finances. It's a reasonable, perhaps not optimal, but reasonable balance between opposing ways of dealing with Social Security. It would enhance protections for people on the low-income end. I believe that it honors the highest stated priorities on people on opposite sides of the aisle. It requires people on the left and the right to make concessions to the concerns from across the aisle. I don't think any solution is possible that doesn't do that. I think the individual provisions of Simpson-Bowles are very well considered, maybe not perfect, but certainly well and carefully considered. I think it should be tweaked. I'm not saying it's a perfect proposal. There are things we could do to improve it. But I do think that unlike packages that are qualitatively to the left or to the right, it offers a far greater potential for a bipartisan accord. And ultimately, if we had something like Simpson-Bowles in law, workers would have a fiscally strengthened Social Security system. And with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Andy. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. And if we had fiscal discipline that matched your time discipline, we wouldn't need this commission.
Let me go to my second slide first. Let's see where my... So let me just make 5 points, and I think Chuck laid out sort of the broadest context possible here. And so let me say this. One, we don't have simply a Social Security problem. We have a retirement security problem. And I think one of the things unseen and paid little attention to in the report is a call for a broad dialogue on personal retirement savings, which I'll show you in a second, was a recommendation that people have sort of passed over, but I think is enormously important as we go on. In addition to Social Security, not paid out of Social Security, but my first point is we have a big retirement security problem, and the debate around Social Security today, as much as people would like to go back and talk about previous debates about Social Security, has to be seen in the context that there's less personal savings. For those people who still remember when your parents burned the mortgage, I think that's a saying that's probably gone out with history. And 3 is we all appreciate the number of people with defined benefits are far less today than they were the last time we debated Social Security. So this debate occurs in a very different context, and it is a much broader debate, as you can see by the things that I've posted up there, than simply about Social Security. 2 is I agree with Chuck. This is better to be dealt with now than later. I know a lot of people have said to me when I was on the commission, let's not deal with Social Security. It is not a budget deficit issue. It is just a pension plan out of balance. And those of us who have been in the private sector and public sector dealing with pension plans know when the pension plan is out of balance, you need to put it back in balance, and the sooner the better. The longer you wait, the worse it gets. So that for people who say, let's just deal with this later, we should deal with it now because it allows us more options. 3 is, I think there are a lot of better alternatives that aren't to Social Security than the Simpson-Bowles plan. I don't think they're necessarily, a violation of the basic premise of the plan when it was first formed, and I tried to be a little truer to this. I'm sort of stuck with this because this was what I presented to the Fiscal Commission as my recommendations for the fixing Social Security, which I'll go back to. Fourth point is this is not about policy anymore. For those of you who'd like to go out and do another study, would like to read more about what the options are, this is all about politics and leadership. Policy is done. It's been done for a long time. We can have more commissions and more discussions and more changes. There really aren't a lot of new ideas. There's just about a new context always for making these decisions, and that's really where we are today. So my proposals were fairly simple. They tried, as I said, to go back to what the integrity and the original purpose of the plan was. Originally, when we created Social Security, 90% of all wages were included in the plan. That was the basic benefit structure of the taxation structure. Because of lots of things, particularly the disparity of wealth in this country. We now are down at around 83 or 84, I think, Chuck, % of wages covered by Social Security. So one is we should just get it back to where it was. That seems like a logical thing, nothing new, just going back to where we were when the program was first funded. Two is we have to decide if we're going to include all those new wages in the Social Security plan. I don't know a lot about bend points, but I do understand that we can capture some of the increased wages by add an additional bend point, which helps bring solvency and affects the higher income earners. Three, I happen to be a believer. I agree with Chuck. It may not be a way to balance Social Security. We need to put the public workers in. I know there are many public workers who don't necessarily agree with me, but as we watch new hires in state after state get put into defined contribution plans, just ask yourself, where's their disability benefit and where's their survivor benefit? And if we're going to have a social insurance system, let's have everyone in. Let's make it a national system and include everyone. Flexibility in investments. There are lots of countries around the world, whether we call them, quote, sovereign wealth funds, which is not a very popular thing to say in Washington, D.C., because supposedly then you're a communist or a socialist or whatever Norm was talking about President Obama being called. But to me, most pension plans have asset allocation. We're a pension plan that has all its money in treasury bonds. I don't think that's wise. I don't think that's helpful. I think there are ways to do it. Canada across the borders figured out a way, and figured out all the other issues that were dealt with when Chuck and others were dealing with their retirement security plan, and in talking about people investing large amount of money in personal accounts, we sort of figured out how we could do a TSP type investment structure. So I do think there is money to be made by putting a certain percentage of the trust fund, as most pension plans do, in a different mix of assets, and I put a 15%. I also added the chain cost of living, not just for Social Security, but a superlative cost of living across the board. And we did talk about, as Chuck said, increasing at 85, a one-time shot to sort of compensate for all of this. Again, I thought Alice Rivlin and Senator Domenici did a fabulous job on increasing in benefits and some of the special minimums. We have treated some salary reduction plans. Again, this is trying to just deal with the integrity of the system. If certain salary reduction plans like 401ks are included in the taxation, other salary reduction plans should be included as well. We shouldn't have some things that you reduce your salary like 401ks, paying Social Security, and other salary reduction plans like DCAPs and others not paying Social Security. We should just be across the board. And this is a proposal that I've talked about and is sort of just in the thought processes. There is a way, at least some consideration should be given if we're ever going to talk about raising the age, which I'm not in favor of in the least bit, to try to figure out a way to how to deal with people who have harder jobs, cannot work as long as other people. I said, kidding around to Alice Rivlin, maybe we should just, deal with the fact that, for all the people who don't start working till their late 20s or early 30s because they're in med school or grad school or getting their PhD, maybe we should just have a 30 and out or a 40 and out, so therefore people that start working earlier and much more stressful jobs can get out earlier, and people that have the opportunity to go to school and get advanced degrees, maybe should wait a little bit longer. I don't think people in that situation really think that's a good idea, those of people who live longer, who have higher degrees, but I think we just do need consideration to the fact that some people can't work as long. And finally, this is actually the recommendation in the Simpson-Bowles Commission about a broad dialogue on the importance of personal retirement savings. And I just want to say it in this group, we should not, as Chuck talked about, not demonizing ideas, we should not demonize the idea of adding personal retirement accounts not paid for by Social Security added on as something we need to deal with in this country in the future. Defined contribution plans as they're now structured do not provide annuities. TSP and TIA-CREF do. They are personal accounts with an annuitization factor. America should have a personal accounts with an annuitization factor, so we increase retirement security above and beyond Social Security. I know there's a debate whether we could increase Social Security even more, but I don't think that's as viable a plan as trying to do what Australia and many other countries have tried to figure out, is how do we have personal accounts but have the benefits of professional management, no withdrawals, annuitization at the end, just like we have for defined benefit plans. You can model a defined benefit plan in a personal retirement savings, and we should not, every time somebody says let's have personal savings accounts, jump up and down and say this is George Bush's privatization plan. It is a very different function if you are separating the funding mechanism from the Social Security funding mechanism, which I recommend. So the time's now to do something. We shouldn't wait. I think Simpson-Bowles, tried to do a lot of things and did it well. I think there are things that can be done much better, but I do think we need to go way past the question of what we're going to do about Social Security to deal with the fact that we're watching the collapse of the defined benefit system around the country, and we need to find something to replace it. Thanks.
Good morning, and thank you. The first thing that I want to do is I want to thank my co-panelists for their comments, and I'll start off there, because I think Chuck rightfully hones in on a critical characteristic of any Social Security reform. It is always and ever a political issue. Theoretically, we could design Social Security so it provided a slim underpinning only for the most needy, or so that it provided most of the retirement, survivor, and disability income protection for most of the population, or we could do it anywhere in between. And we could fund it any number of ways. But that's only theory. In reality, what we have to do is establish a public contract through the political arena. And in many ways, that is appropriate. For more than any other program that I'm aware of, this program is perceived by the people as their program. The President's Commission states in its preamble that it views its plan, including its proposals for Social Security, as the starting point for a serious national conversation. And as Andy ably points out, there are many ways to carry that discussion forward and many options to consider. It's not yet certain to me that the Commission gave us a politically acceptable package. What I want to do is first step back to look at the larger picture of Social Security and the budget. Second, look at Social Security in the context of overall retirement, survivor, and disability trends. And third, to talk about appropriate ages for retirement. The task set out for the nation is to tackle the need to stop our national debt from growing faster than our GDP, and to do so within the next decade in order to stabilize the projected debt to GDP ratio at an acceptable level into the future. The Commission lays out a plan to do this, and it includes Social Security reform among its recommendations. The potential problem with this is that Social Security is not a key player in the problem we are having with our long-term debt to GDP ratio. As this chart shows, the overall cost of the current Social Security benefit structure is projected to rise somewhat with the retirement of the baby boomers, but only somewhat, and then it levels off. Given all that we face in this nation, I don't find that a particularly scary or unmanageable prospect. More importantly, it is illegal for Social Security to deficit spend. If the revenues are not there, the program simply does not pay full benefits. As a nation, we have a choice whether to pay for, say, a war in Afghanistan now or later. With Social Security, we either pay for it now or we don't pay benefits. So when the Commission report states reform Social Security for its own sake, not for deficit reduction, it is in a way making a factual statement as well as a political one. Indeed, if you took Social Security out of the report, it would not change the major purpose of the report or its impact. So one question comes to mind is, will the politics of trying to address Social Security divert too much political energy from the pressing need to address our debt issue? Will the size of out-year benefit reductions in Social Security envisioned in the Commission plan explode politically once people understand them? After all, Social Security still enjoys a sizable, it's over $2.5 trillion trust fund that was accumulated over the past decades through taxes paid on workers' wages, generally of less than $100,000. It is not the Social Security program's fault that our general fund budget is facing a crisis. On the other hand, knowing that we also want to stabilize Social Security, and both of my compatriots said that, and I echo it, and we want to stabilize it for the long term, and this being a political operation, is this the chance to seize the moment to accomplish that task also as we balance the general fund's fiscal house? While others will tip the scale differently, and while I think there are several interesting initiatives in the Commission's plan that I want to get back to, I think personally it goes too far in the direction of benefit reductions and raises the chances for political turmoil over and above what we already faced. Let me explain my reasoning, and then I want to focus on the things that I find of real interest in the plan. Under current law, a worker whose average earnings are about $43,000 who retired at age 65 in 2010 would receive about $16,800 annually in benefits. Under the Commission's proposal, that person's 35-year-old child would, at age 65, receive, waged indexed to today's dollar, a benefit of about $13,600. And the 5-year-old grandchild at age 65 would receive a benefit of about $12,400. A reduction of about a quarter in benefits. Those future generations will also pay higher income taxes on most of their benefits, and they may or may not, for those of us who are eternally hopeful, face higher health care costs now than the current generation. Those making higher wages, but wages still way below the $250,000 definition of middle class that is talked about in the tax arena, will face reductions of up to 44% from today's age 65 benefit. That's a lot. And it runs counter to repeated public opinion polls. Here are just two responses to illustrate my point. The first chart shows why I say the public across party lines consider Social Security their program. They pay into the fund, they see the benefits. They say they don't mind paying taxes because it provides security and stability to millions of retired Americans, their family members, their neighbors, so forth. The second chart shows that this is an area where resistance to Social Security tax increases, at least on the part of the workers, may not be as much of a political problem as taxes in other areas. Note especially the high response of our young people, the people who would suffer the biggest cuts if we follow something along the lines of the Commission. And in that regard, I simply raise the point that the 6.2% of wages Social Security contribution rate was set in 1977 to go into effect in 1990, and it hasn't been changed since. It may not be as unthinkable as current politics dictates to consider an out-year payroll tax increase. Moreover, Andy provides us other options to increase funding to the trust fund. In summary, for this program, we may have options other than benefit cuts. There's a lot of conversation about providing greater protection for the most vulnerable among us, and here the Commission has led the way with proposals to provide an enhanced minimum benefit for long-term low-wage workers. They also propose a 5% bump up after receiving benefits for 20 years, giving a needed boost to the old and the long-term disabled. These are both low-cost items that will effectively boost benefit adequacy in the targeted populations. But under the Commission proposal, reducing benefits by changing the benefit formula would affect those with a lifetime earnings of over $37,000 a year, compared to Andy's proposal to reduce the formula only for those much higher up the income scale. Who is vulnerable in retirement is, in reality, far more than those who are below the median earnings of $37,000. Here's where I think I would rebalance Chuck's political scales. Social Security is not a poverty program targeted toward the most vulnerable. It is a poverty prevention program, and one that is critical to the maintenance of a strong middle class in this country. Cutting into the strength of the program for the middle income sets off a downward spiral as more elderly become more reliant on their children, who in turn become less able to save for their own retirement and educate their own children. And education is the key to the future. Today, as shown here, only in the top 1/5, that the red is the Social Security income as it plays into the sources of income for people age 65 and older. And only when you get down to this final little circle down here does it become less than really a primary source of income. And that's because most of these people are still working. We also have to keep in mind, as this chart shows, that more people are being crowded into that flat cost curve that I mentioned before. And the reason more people are being crowded into that flat cost curve is that benefits are already going down. This is because of the already scheduled increase in retirement age and because of expected increases in Medicare Part B and D premiums. In 1983, the final package, the Greenspan Commission package, was relatively balanced between revenue and benefit reductions. But by the time Congress got through, including my old boss Jake Pickle and Chairman Rostenkowski, we had also added to it the wage increase, which substantially imbalanced that package more toward benefit reductions. The Commission rightly calls for a reinforced dialogue on the need to save. I've spent the last quarter century working on private sector pensions and savings. It's a call that has been going out for decades. At this point, I would say we got to do more than talk. In addition, we have to keep in mind the reason we have social insurance in the first place. We have it because it is harder and often impossible to do by and for ourselves what we can do for each other when individual risks are shared in a group. To put it bluntly, it is a lot more costly for me to protect myself against investment, longevity, and inflation risk than it is to put my money with others in a large pool, not to mention providing me disability and survivor protection. Not just the most vulnerable, but the large group in the middle need a sound foundation, one apparently they are willing to pay for. And then, yes, we need savings on top. Finally, I want to talk a bit about raising the age. Simply put, I want to change this dialogue, and I feel I can since I wrote the initial amendment on my dining room table with a hand calculator. Andy talks about a flexible retirement age. In 1983, what we actually did, and what we didn't explain it well then or afterward, is reduce the benefit available at age 62 by about 10% when everything's phased in, but we also increased the payout by 8% for each year after full retirement that an individual delays claiming benefits. In other words, we created a retirement range from 62 to 70. If you wait the full 8 years, your benefit is 76% bigger than it is at age 62. Clearly, we need to do a better job of educating people about the benefits of delaying if they can. And in this regard, I do want to credit the Social Security Administration. I just got my benefit projection thing in the mail the other day, and it had a flyer in it that homed in exactly on this point, how much more I could get and reasons I might want to delay claiming benefits. I think we need to look at all retirement age proposals in terms of what they do to the retirement range, because I think that's the reality of the world. The Commission actually adds to this discussion when they propose to link benefits to changes in life expectancy in the very distant future by also proposing that individuals can take half their benefit at an early age and the rest later, and by proposing an early retirement hardship benefit that would serve those no longer able to work but who don't qualify for disability. These two proposals are a bit short on details, but they do broaden an important discussion. The fact is, not all of us, including the lower income and many minorities, enjoy the increased longevity that we hear so much about, and not all of us can be expected to work into our later years. So we have much to talk about, and I look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for interesting comments and for staying on time so we can have some dialogue. I want to first ask if any of you have questions or comments based on the presentations of the others.
I do, but I don't, it's not necessary if Janice and Andy don't. I'm happy to go to questions.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Well, I would just say that with respect to Andy's comments, I don't have a whole lot to add. Obviously, Andy and I are in a different place in terms of our policy preferences. And I stated during my opening remarks the reasons why I wouldn't favor a reform proposal along the lines that Andy put together. But I want to compliment him because I think we agree on the necessity of dealing with the problem. I compliment him for putting together a constructive proposal. And I also think he's done something really useful by saying we should be thinking in terms of overall retirement security and how Social Security, the base defined benefit, interrelates with other saving that people may be doing. And I think that's a very important contribution to the debate. I have somewhat bigger concerns with, I think, Janice's presentation. I think she was careful to note that the Fiscal Commission only offered proposals to balance Social Security's own books. But to talk about the Fiscal Commission's work in the context of whether we should be dealing with Social Security in the context of a larger budget problem, I'm very concerned about that because there have been many people out there, in my view, very irresponsibly suggesting that somehow Social Security is this arbitrary target for savings, as though politicians in their zeal to find easy savings someplace find the politically easy choice to go after Social Security benefits to solve a larger budget problem. It's such a, and I'm not saying that Janice said this, but a lot of people outside have taken that tack to attacking the President's Fiscal Commission. It's absolute nonsense that neither the President's Commission or any other Social Security proposal would look for any savings from Social Security beyond which that is absolutely necessary to balance the program's own books. And if we do believe that Social Security is a self-financing program, if we do believe that the program doesn't have borrowing authority, one way or the other, those books have to be balanced. So I'm not sure it's terribly useful to be talking about the President's Fiscal Commission and their larger charge of dealing with our overall debt situation. We have to deal with Social Security one way or the other. It's not an option. If we care about Social Security as a self-financing program, that imbalance between what the program is promising and what the program takes in simply has to be closed. And the earlier we close it, the more information people will have about the measures we're taking to close it, and the less of the difficulty of closing that shortfall will be felt by younger generations. That's the first and global point. Secondly, I just have some real concerns about some of the numbers that Janice put forward. Obviously, you can come up with some pretty horrific numbers for the size of so-called benefit reductions under the Commission's proposal or any other proposal if you do it in a certain way. If you use wage index dollars, if you use replacement rates at a constant retirement age rather than at the normal retirement age, and you can make benefit reductions look pretty severe. The reality is that we have, I think, a presentation problem. The Social Security benefit formula in the 1970s was rejiggered to rise with growth in national average wages. That's not a part of the original design of Social Security. It was added in the 1970s, and it adds substantially to the cost of Social Security over time. Now, the consequence of trying to pay constant, basically what the formula does is it says that for a given real wage level, replacement rates over time are going to rise, and they're going to rise very, very substantially. Today, we pay a certain replacement rate to someone earning $50,000 a year. In 2030 or 2040, we're going to pay the $50,000 worker a much, much higher replacement rate based on the logic that that person is further down the wage spectrum. And so by talking in terms of wage index dollars, we're basically setting a bar where we're going to call anything a benefit reduction that doesn't have the full amount of the current wage replacement formula, which again I think is appropriate if we had a savings system, but where we have an income transfer system where we're not actually increasing net retirement saving by having this growth in the benefit formula. I'm not sure that's the right way to think about things. And I'm very concerned about it because to maintain the current wage replacement formula, costs would have to rise from about 12–13% of each worker's wages today to about 17% in a quarter century. If our standard is constant wage replacement at a constant age, which is the figures that were being cited before, we'd have to have even more cost growth, 18–19%. So it really locks us into an extraordinarily expensive way of dealing with the system if we define any departure from that as some type of absolute benefit reduction. And I think that's the wrong frame of reference to use.
I would like to
Yeah, go ahead.
say something. Well, on the first point, I don't think we're particularly far apart because I don't think, but the way I tried to pose the question is not to delay doing Social Security and not to pretend that it must, and not to say that it must be handled separately. The question I was trying to raise is simply that it is true. It's not the biggest factor in our efforts to control the debt and the deficit, and that it is far more explosive than a lot of the other things. And I think we have to be very clear about where we are headed, and be very clear that you don't solve our deficit and debt problems by thinking you can just play around with Social Security. That's the point I'm making. So I don't think that's too different from where you were. On the other thing, on wage indexing, but one of the big argument behind wage indexing was that over time the wealth of the nation grows, and wage indexing allows a worker to participate, workers' eventual benefits, to take advantage of that worker's contribution to the overall growth in the economy. If you just did price indexing, that effort that the worker made that made us a richer country would not be honored. So I think wage indexing is appropriate. Whether you use a constant age or whether you vary the age, I mean, Chuck's right. We can come up with various numbers using various measures, but I think that doesn't erase the fact that what we're saying is to our young people is that you will have a much smaller program. The numbers are going to vary how much smaller depending on how we do it. It's still going to be a lot smaller. And what we're hearing from our young people is that they don't want that. So I think that's the basic political issue that we face.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't want to drag it on, but there's just a couple of elements of that that I feel it's important to respond to. One is that it's important to understand the mathematics of this. As the worker-to-collector ratio drops, and as we have a pay-as-you-go system, the return on each worker's contribution is going to decline no matter what we do. Mm-hmm. It's not going to decline, if we go to price indexing. It's going to decline no matter what. You cannot pay a wage index benefit formula without a rising tax rate. So one way or the other, under the current level of method of financing, young workers are going to get a worse deal. So it's not as though wage indexing preserves the contribution of younger workers or honors the contribution of younger workers. It's just that it expresses the imbalance through a higher tax rate rather than a benefit growth formula that grows slower than wages. It's very important to understand that. It's not something where we have a choice whether or not that declining return is going to be manifested. We are going to manifest it through a slower rate of growth or a rising tax burden. That's the first point. The second point is I fundamentally disagree with this picture that somehow we're making the Social Security system smaller. By any measure, the Social Security system 20 years from now is going to be much bigger than it is today. It's going to pay higher per capita benefits. It's going to cost much more of each worker's take-home pay to finance relative to the size of the economy, relative to purchasing power, relative to the size of the tax base. It's going to be much bigger, even if we went to an entirely a solution that was done entirely on the benefit side. So I simply don't agree with this idea that somehow the Social Security is getting the system is going to get smaller under any scenario going forward.
Obviously, we could talk all night, but maybe we should go to questions.
We will go to questions. I would just make one political point, which is it's really a difficult and delicate issue to figure out how you can politically take Social Security out and deal with it as a Social Security issue from that larger question, simply because everybody is going to have to give up something in their favorite areas or sacrifice. And if you start with one area, you're going to get a lot of pushback, in this case from Democrats, saying you're trying to lead us into a briar patch. You want to deal with the issue that you'd like to deal with, and then later on you'll say taxes, never mind. So just that's something to keep in mind. Now for questions, just a couple of ground rules. One, there are microphones, standing mics. If you can't reach or get to a standing mic, we will try and get a mic to you. Please identify yourself. And please remember that these are questions and not statements, and they should be brief and succinct. Sir.
Thank you. David Podoff, University of North Carolina and Georgetown University. A disclaimer, I don't know Mr. Bowles, the co-chair of the commission, but he's allowed me to bring a bunch of students up here from University of North Carolina for the semester, so I'm delighted to be here. I don't want to get in the quagmire of wage indexing versus price indexing, folks. Just a couple of statements, and I do have a question. Andy, I'm delighted you indicated we should not demonize personal retirement accounts. I had the privilege of working for the late Senator Moynihan, who had a proposal for those accounts as add-ons. Unfortunately, it was mischaracterized because of confusion of what he was doing with respect to pay-as-you-go. My fault, because I didn't explain it very well when I worked for him. Chuck, we've had this debate for years, back in the middle 90s, but I want to go back further in history. I want to go back to biblical times. And if I recall, Moses came down with 10 commandments, not the 11th, which is that, as Janice pointed out, that the payroll tax has to be 12.4% of payroll. Okay? There's nothing sacred about that, despite what you say about the politics. As Janet points out, there are people who are willing to pay more in Social Security taxes. Now, I don't want to go to that 18%, that you're suggesting, because that's not where I want to go. But it seems to me that we designed the fix for Social Security in a backwards way. I would have put another word in. We designed it in a backwards way. The correct way, in my judgment, to design a Social Security reform proposal is to start with some changes on the benefit side that make sense and that many people would agree with. Increases in the normal retirement age, increases in the contribution base, affixed to the CPI adjustment we use. And then we calculate all that, and then we call up Steve or Alice, where are you folks, and say, I've made all these changes, and what is the tax rate I need to make the system work? I don't think we should start out with the tax rate is fixed at 12.4, because that's what Moses said, and then say, oh, how can I get to 12.4? Now, Chuck, why do we go that way? What's wrong with, at least as we say, putting everything on the table, including a tax increase, which might be modest to 13% or something like that? What's wrong with doing that?
Well, nothing at all. And actually, David, you've said a lot of things that I think are very wise and which I agree with. And this actually reminds me of some of the points that Andy made as well, which is I think, there's some commonality of view that that we want a national system of defined benefit protections for everyone. and we would like people to be able to do saving on top of it through proposals like the ones Senator Moynihan put together or like the ones Andy has put together. Beyond that, we're talking about the details. At what point, at what tax rate is the national defined benefit system funded, and at what point are we asking people to save above that? And that's a negotiation. It shouldn't be theology. You're right. Moses didn't come down from Mount Sinai with a tablet saying that the payroll tax should be 12.4. I don't know whether the optimal rate of risk-free defined benefit saving for people to be doing is done with 10% of their wages or 15% of their wages, and this is a point I make in my book. I think we really get tripped up when we get into this theology about, well, you know, we can't have any saving within the current 12.4 that goes into defined contribution saving, or the 12.4% tax rate must never rise, or what have you. That sort of theology doesn't really help inform the debate very much. And I also think this cuts to another concern that I have, which is that often people will say, well, you know, I care about Social Security and I'm willing to pay for it. The problem is you don't know what you're willing to pay for unless you are willing to fund your own retirement benefit. The current system doesn't ask people to do that. The current system promises you benefits with the next generation's taxpayer dollars. So we don't know what people are actually willing to fund. We know what people are willing to want and to tax the next generation to provide, but that's a very, very different question. So I think this question of the benefits that they're willing to pay for is really only answered by presenting you know, those tax rates to the younger generations that will be funding those benefits and asking them if they think that those tax levels are a good idea. So whenever we talk about tax levels, we just need to bear in mind you know, it's very easy to promise somebody else's tax revenue, which is effectively what we're doing through the current system's benefit formula.
Thanks. It should be noted that Moses lived for several hundred years and drew down a whole lot more than he put in to the retirement system. Yes.
Hi, I'm Jerry Shea from the AFL-CIO, and I'm going to skip the Old Testament and the New Testament. And you know, my view is that the Fiscal Commission did a great disservice by taking up Social Security. And I want to ask the panel what their view on whether or not, you know, whether or not they should. And I say that because I think that we need, I think it's enormously important in this time when the dependency on Social Security for retirees is going up, and I believe when the numbers come out in a couple of years, we'll have jumped substantially because of the recent economic downturn. And long term, I don't think it's a temporary thing that will go down. I think when you look at the numbers, 63% or so now you know, rely on Social Security for half of their retirement income and so forth. And we know that the long-term unemployed on the over 50s. So all these problems are coming together to put a tremendous burden on retirement income in general, and that's going to land on Social Security for many people because they don't have any alternative. And that is in the context of this enormous economic shift brought on by the global economy, where we have just simply eliminated a huge number of middle-class jobs, good jobs. We've reduced them to $10, $12 an hour and without health benefits and so forth. This is a different economy in the past, and I think we have to have a discussion, and it's really important to have a discussion about Social Security in that context, because we have some basic choices to be made. And the reason I say I think it's a great disservice that the Fiscal Commission took it up is that it really has politicized and polarized the debate over Social Security, and as opposed to having any kind of a thoughtful, in-depth discussion about what is an enormously important problem, but which simply can't be handled adequately, I think, by looking at the money in, money out equation without sort of looking at the underlying economic causes and making an assessment from that point of view. So I'm curious as to, you know, did anybody say no, let's not do this?
No. I mean, I think, A, the President told us to do it, so we did it, so that was kind of the easiest answer to the question. But I think you may make the argument why we should talk about it, because it's really hard to not talk about all the challenges we face as a country, about having a plan about investment, tax rates, you know, infrastructure, spending, Social Security, Medicare, by taking each of them and trying to do them piece by piece. So, I mean, the discussion that was just going back from the last question, okay, so you have 2%, if people are willing, let's say for the sake of argument, to spend another 2% on Social Security, is it better to spend it on Social Security or Medicare? I mean, it's still my 2%. I'd like to have all my choices and one plan in front of me, not like that's my 2% for this, now we're going to have my 2% for that, then I'm going to have my 2% to balance the budget. So I actually think your argument is one that actually says if we're going to look for a fiscal plan for the future in a global economy, which we shouldn't have employer-based benefits at all, because it just puts the price on the cost of the products, you know, we should have everything on the table at the same time. And I actually, you know, don't think it was, you know, helpful or hurtful about having it here. I would just say this. People have politicized the debate on Social Security. You know, the last election, I do remember, you know, many people criticizing my co-commission member, Paul Ryan, who I criticize a lot about a lot of things, you know, for as if his plan was going to be the plan, you know, if the Republicans won the election. So the Democrats decided, well, we don't know how to get Social Security in debate. Let's get Paul Ryan's roadmap in debate and see if that helps us get elected. So I think the whole thing is politicized. I think your point's the right point. How does America have a plan to compete in the 21st century in a global economy, and how is everything on the table for that discussion?
Okay.
It's a broader discussion. I was just trying to suggest the broader discussion is really beyond what you said, Andy, about retirement security. It's about basic economic conditions for middle class in this country, not deficit. And it is taking up in the deficit context that obscures all the other issues. That's the problem with it. So that's why.
That's why I voted no, because we didn't deal with investment.
Sir.
Daniel Marins from Social Security Works, and I think that my question might be primarily directed at Mr. Blahous, but I'd enjoy hearing from everybody. I don't understand how the Bowles-Simpson proposal could be viewed in any way as a balanced or progressive proposal. I think that you talked about the erosion of the link between earnings and benefits as somehow being progressive. I think that most Social Security advocates consider that link to be one of the most fundamental features of the program that ensures a sense of equity and political support for the program. I also think that the depth of the middle class cuts, whether you're looking at it at a static age or even at the normal retirement age, and we know that even now the normal retirement age is too high for many people, but certainly the Social Security Administration looks at it from that baseline of age 65, so I don't think it's unreasonable to look at it that way. I don't think that the quote-unquote sweeteners of the enhanced minimum benefit and the birthday benefit at age 80 are really significant adequacy increases. I think that they're actually kind of giving lip service to improving the adequacy for the poor, when in fact if you look at them closely, the enhanced special minimum benefit only becomes more than the regular benefit with 25 years working experience, because you only are entitled to the full benefit at 30 years, and the people on the lowest part of the income scale, only about fewer than 20% of the lowest earners have the years that would qualify them to make that enhanced benefit worth it. And in fact, 80% would see their benefits cut through the other cuts. I think that the birthday benefit is totally offset by the adoption of the chained CPI, and that if we really wanted to do something for the oldest old, it would be through the CPIE. And then finally, that the hardship exemption, which even based on the actuaries' assumptions, many of the people that it would, the same thing, the work experience requirement, with the 25-year work experience requirement, the people that it would be targeted at, which according to the actuaries' assumptions is the lowest income people, the vast majority of them would not qualify for it. So I see that all as kind of window dressing for a plan that, as Janice pointed out, cuts benefits for people making 40 grand by 20% at a time when this is the most vulnerable. It's 2/3 cuts and 1/3 savings, and I don't consider adjusting the cap to 90% to be a serious concession to the left, because that's just fixing a loophole that naturally evolved.
Well, I'm happy to respond to that. You actually did say one thing that I agreed with, which is that I do think the contribution benefit link is important, and I think that we erode that contribution benefit link at our peril. Now, on behalf of the President's Commission, I will say that the only respect in which that contribution benefit link is undermined in any way is through the provision of additional benefits to people. So you cannot say that somehow that's some hardship that they created. The only extent to which there is an erosion of that contribution benefit link is through the mechanism of adding additional benefits on the low-income end. So you're trading off either the maintenance of the contribution benefit link versus additional retirement security on the low-income end. You know, we can argue which is the higher policy virtue, but they're both present in the plan. You say that you don't understand how the Commission proposal is progressive. I mean, that's just it's a purely mathematical consequence. This is a plan, and whether you like it or dislike the plan, there's no denying the math that a higher, significantly higher percentage of system resources under Simpson-Bowles would flow to people on the lower income end versus the higher income end. Almost the entirety of the cost restraint in the proposal comes from benefit growth on the higher income end. The bend point factor changes are extremely progressive. The increase in, the new minimum benefit provision, the extra benefits for the old, all those things are extremely progressive. So, we can talk about whether that's the right policy, but we shouldn't debate the mathematics of it. The mathematics are that current law is going to have a much higher percentage of system resources going to people of higher income than Simpson-Bowles. And that's just, there's simply no avoiding that conclusion.
Okay.
My name is Heidi Hartman, Institute for Women's Policy Research, and my question is mainly for Mr. Ornstein, actually, and somewhat also for Mr. Stern. But since Jerry Shea mentioned it, I do want to say that a new report we released this morning does show that the dependence on Social Security has increased tremendously in the last 10 years as a result of the recession, so that, especially for men. So men are now about 6 percentage points more reliant on Social Security if we use 80% or more reliance, and I presume it's it's due to the falling away of other income sources. But my question for you, Mr. Ornstein, is that when you opened the discussion for this session just recently, you said, so no one's going to like it. Everybody's going to have to give up something, and I wonder why that's the assumption. We're a very wealthy country. I think the one graph of Janice's that nobody disagreed with was the one that showed Social Security growing in the long term 1 percentage point of GDP.
Actually, I disagree with that graph, but I didn't,
okay.
I didn't want to go into everything.
Well, I think most people agree with it, that those are the projections of the actuaries up through 75 years. So if that's true, it seems to me very affordable, and that makes me wonder why Mr. Stern, defender of the working people of America, would be in favor of cutting Social Security benefits. Why can't the United States afford a 1% increase in GDP going to older people? A financial transaction tax would raise 1% of GDP just like that. It would be very painless for the vast, vast majority of Americans. Taking the cap off the payroll, what you pay your payroll taxes on, that would eliminate the problem too. So I just don't understand why the assumption has to be we have to cut Social Security. That just seems to me nonsense when we have such a wealthy country and people depend on it so much. That's my question. Why do you see it that way?
Let me start by saying it's not clear we will have such a wealthy country if we don't get a handle on what is a large and looming and disastrous deficit and debt problem. And if you're just looking at the politics of how you deal with that large and looming problem, you're not going to be able to do it unless everybody is sitting around the table saying, I'll give a little bit on something that I care about, you're going to have to give on something that you care about. I think that's almost undeniable. I'm also a little, maybe just because I'm naive on this subject, but even something like a trust fund, I don't see a trust fund in existence. I see a bunch of IOUs that have gone into a safety deposit box, and at some point you take out the IOUs and I don't know what's there. It's built around, and I remember having a conversation actually with the late great Pat Moynihan about this, the whole notion that you've got this stronger economy, an underlying stronger economy, and you're actually paying down debt along the way. That was the whole idea, I think, that we haven't been able to do. So these things are all linked to me politically, even if you could separate out Social Security. It ought to be dealt with as retirement security. I agree entirely. If you take it out, there's no chance of getting any kind of political agreement on a larger package.
You too. They have to throw Social Security in there as a bargaining chip. That I understand, but I don't understand it on moral grounds. Mr. Stern.
Well, if you want to have, as I said, this is not about a discussion about policy. It's about politics and leadership. I would ask myself, why do we pass, the high-end tax cuts? Why do we have less corporate taxes going into balancing our budget? Why do we not have a VAT tax? Why don't we have a different kind of healthcare system? I can go on and on about all the important policy considerations that I ask myself every day Why does a nation worry so much about where the ceiling is and not as much about where the floor is for people in terms of what are our basic benefits compared to other countries around the world? I think they're all fair questions. If you ask, what do you do when you sit on a commission, and if you think the chain cost of living, the superlative cost of living is a huge cut, even with the offsets for 85, I guess I made cuts to the working people of the world. I feel like I tried to preserve the integrity of Social Security as it was set up. You know, tried to deal with the 90%, the salary reduction, putting money in places, putting state and local people in. I think they're all responsible policy considerations. And as Bob Greenstein and others talk about the superlative cost of living, if it's applied across the board, he considers that decent policy. And I wouldn't call him a particularly enemy of the poor and the working class.
I'm sorry, I have 2 points on this. One is, I did have a problem with that chart. And the reason I have a problem with that chart is that the real growth due to population aging over the next generation is not 1% of GDP, but it's 2% of GDP. That chart basically disguises that, because what happened is that when the recession hit, GDP fell, and so Social Security costs spiked as a percent of GDP. And so by starting it at 5% of GDP is masking the fact that it's been artificially increased in just the last couple of years because of the recession. But the actual increase in national costs to pay for our aging population is actually 2% of GDP, starting from the low 4s just before the recession to going to the low 6s. So that's the actual growth in system costs over this next generation. The second point is, why deal with Social Security? You're sort of asking this fundamental question, is somehow Social Security is some bargaining chip, or we're just throwing it in unnecessarily into this broader deficit negotiation. Look, we have a Social Security system that is supposed to be a self-financing system. Now, we can try to keep a self-financing system, or we cannot have a self-financing system. If we don't want a self-financing system, if we could have a system that's financed with bank transaction taxes or what have you, we could do that. We could have a system where there's no relationship between what people put into the system, what they get out, get rid of the separate trust fund, get rid of self-financing, finance it out all out of general revenues. We could do that. But as long as we have a self-financing system, then one way or the other, Social Security's tax revenue has to pay for the benefits that it obligates. And if we're going to have that type of system, then we either have to raise Social Security revenue substantially or cut benefit growth substantially. That's just the math of it.
Let me just say a couple things. I'll stick by my chart, whether we change it a little bit here or change it a little bit there. It's still a relatively unscary chart. Secondly, I think what came up in earlier was, we're really talking here not about the most vulnerable. There's sort of a general agreement across lines that we need to pay attention to the most vulnerable, however that gets defined. It's really the middle class. And in that regard, what Jerry was talking about, I think, is something that's just beginning to come in over the transom into the policy debate, which is that it is going to be quite a long time before we pull out of this, the impact of this recession. Everybody wants personal savings. It got devastated. People want us to save more. People are just trying to get a job. Young people who are starting out, having trouble finding work, are going to be behind the curve for the rest of their lives, or could be. People who are older aren't going to have time to catch up. This is going to ripple through for quite some. What the recession hangover, if you will, is going to come into this, and it sharpens the political importance of, and the political explosiveness of what it is that we wind up doing for the middle class. When we talk about higher, we have to just keep remembering, when we talk about higher income in Social Security, we really aren't talking about Bill Gates. Wages, taxes are only paid today up to a little over $100,000 in wages, and that still is way below the $250,000 middle income measure that gets bandied about in the tax field. This is just, and most of the people are below the 100,000. So that's where the issue, I think, is, and where the difficulty in finding the political compromise, and it's going to be a political compromise. I think that's where the difficulty is going to be. And we probably help if we spend a little more time thinking about the impact of the recession, how we get savings going, and how we deal with that middle group in there.
Okay, just one last comment that I think flows from a couple that we've had over here. The President's State of the Union message framed a lot around the notion of investment, which many Republicans have said is just a code word for spending. But the fact is, if we're talking about investing in universal broadband, we're talking about investing in basic research, that's probably a core issue of whether we can get high-end, high-value, middle-class jobs down the road. And those issues cannot be divorced from the question of Social Security, the question of deficit and debt reduction, or of a broader issue of retirement security. All of these things are interrelated, and whether you separate Social Security out from Deficit and Debt Commission, you can't separate it out from what kinds of people are going to be paying into a system and whether we've got the jobs available that actually provide enough robust revenue to finance it down the road. With that, please join me in thanking our panel members. There's now a half-hour break for us while the Press Club staff sets up for lunch, and so to make their job easier, we need to vacate the room as quickly as possible, return at 12:30 to eat lunch, and listen to our luncheon speaker, Angela Glover Blackwell of PolicyLink, at 1 p.m. And in the